about places that are seats that are free here right in front of me, so perhaps some of you would like to sit in front. Those of you who can't hear, can you hear at the back? Can you turn it down just a little bit? It's a bit too hard. Just a little bit. Okay. Well, since there's still a few people trickling in, I thought we might just start with a little chanting. And I'd like to suggest the chants of some of the great religions of the world. We start with Hindu chant. India is very much in our minds at this point. Well, we'll start with a chant. An Indian raga. No words, we just simply hum it with me. Invocation. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai. And now Kyrie eleison. perhaps as we start, it might be good to be very clear as to what our objectives are. I hope that you will bear with me this during the course of this day in a rather experiential venture rather than just listening to talks. I think that's what people want and need in our time. Our objective is to try to apply some of the knowledge and experience and attunement gained by hermits and rishis in the Himalayas and some great saints and mystics of the past and present. Apply them to something very nitty-gritty, which is the unfoldment of our personality. And it may sound, for some of you, it might sound rather selfish, but I'd like to point out the word of Dr. Kubler-Ross, who is, as you probably know, a wonderful psychiatrist working with people with the dying, amongst other things, people with collateral resentment. And she said once that as one is about to die, the two things that one regrets most. The first is not having done the things one wanted to do, but the second one is not having become what one would have liked to become. And so I would say, let's start now. Not wait for the last moment. Too late. And it's true, truly enough, we are kind of motivated by a kind of anticipated view of what we could be if we would be what we might be. I never say should, shouldn't say should unless one unless one can say could. Now, all right, so what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, is to put you, or rather all of us, myself included, through a process. And since I don't want to manipulate you, I'd like to explain to you what we're doing. And so there will be some explanation, so it can't be all experiential, but there's no other way unless as I say, I would try to hypnotize you, make you go through all kinds of states, which is just exactly what I don't want to do. But anyway, let's start by a trial run. So, would you, for example, let us first of all try to outline, or let's say label in a few words, what would be some of the salient qualities that we would like to develop in ourselves. Number one, let's say insight into all things, clarity of insight. That's what you would like to develop. Now then, is it get your truth together, mastery, be able to, really be in control of things? Be another one. Or would it be being more loving and kind and compassionate to people? It's another one. It's really valid, isn't it? And the other one is being very upfront and not being shy and saying how one feels about things. It's another quality that we'd like to develop. And I'm sure there are many more, like peacefulness, joyfulness. Well, you name them. We could play a game, like, for example, try and each one of us try to make a count of which other qualities are the most popular in this hall, but we won't do that. But I understand that, of course, if we were asked to make a choice as to what is the quality that we would like to develop most, we would find it very difficult. On the other hand, sometimes it's a way of focusing things, of making things a little more clear in our minds as to what our real objectives are in life, or what our wishes are. And perhaps, in any case, one might say as much as this, and that is that normally in the growth process of our personality, we first develop certain qualities and then other qualities, it's very difficult to develop them all at the same time. If you're writing composition, for example, you can't write the andante and the allegro at the same time. You work with one and then the other. So it is possible, it might be wiser for us to work with, focus on certain qualities at a certain moment in our life, and other qualities another time. So, therefore, now supposing that you had a choice of, oh yes, one more drawback about the method that I'm using now is that one is verbalizing. I mean, supposing that you would tell me what is a quality, which is something that I have done in the past, in some of them said that you have to tell me what is the quality you want to develop. You would be verbalizing and consequently conceptualizing. In other words, you would put a label on something that is far too rich and too subtle to be able to be constrained by a label. But there's no other way of proceeding. Let's say for our game, we begin with this game. Well, later on we'll go into things a little more, how can I say, elaborately. Okay, now, so close your eyes for a moment and just imagine a quality amongst those qualities that I mentioned or other qualities that I did not mention, which at this moment you would like to give preference to or priority to. Now this has got to be spontaneous and therefore it shouldn't take too much time. Anything crops up in your mind right away. That will be the answer. And we have difficulty, of course, in choosing, as already said. Now I would ask you the question silently. Why is it that you want to develop this quality more than any other? Now, if I were able to engage in conversation, would take more than it would be at the sacrifice of a lot of things we want to do this in the course of the day. If we had 2 days, it would be easier. But anyway, if we could talk about it together, I'm sure that some of you would say, well, the reason why I'd like to develop this quality is that it would make me more effective in life, more able to meet my responsibilities and so on and so forth. I think so. Well, what the conclusion one can draw from that is that one wishes to develop an aspect of one's personality that Jung calls the persona, the mask, which is the product of our adaptability to the environment. And most of us, most of the time, are adapting ourselves to the environment and so being self-motivated. I don't say it's bad, but that's the way it is. As you know that in biology, in the realm of biology, species do not only adapt themselves to the environment, as Darwin said, but as Lamarck said, some animals or species do adapt the environment to their own sense of purpose, and those are the more advanced forms. And there's always balance in our lives between our adaptation to the environment and our way of transforming the environment and make it fit into our sense of an anticipated purpose. Not causality, that's purposefulness. Now, I'll give you an example of this. It's a very good example, I think. It's the second movement of the fourth concerto of Beethoven. I don't know if you know it, but if you don't, somebody might make a point in listening to it. Beethoven is describing a real-life situation. He is portraying himself as a chemist, and the orchestra is the outer world. The world that keeps on impacting him. It's very violent and ruthless and so on. Comes as a big crash trying to impact him. And he responds very quietly and calmly, as though he was saying to the impact of the world, well, cool it now, I just need to feel what's coming through. Now you see, most of us are always simply react to the impact. Now what he's doing is, and if we react to the impact, what we do is something like a reflex action, where just simply the same energy that hit us is rebound back again. We are not calling upon the whole resourcefulness of our being. What Beethoven was doing was to call a halt. That's exactly what one does in the course of a spiritual retreat, for example. Close the doors to what is happening outside and listen to what's coming through. And then out of that silence, out of that turning within, a most beautiful melody unfolds, but quite organically, as of its own ability to unfold. And of course the orchestra comes and impacts him again, but this time he answers a little more strongly, and then eventually it becomes a real dialogue. He's really able to meet the impact of the orchestra, and finally he becomes so powerful the orchestra recedes in the background, and he's wow. It's a very good example of how one could learn how to work with oneself rather than just simply as a being the victim of the circumstance outside oneself. And everyone is in his place in life, or her place in life, in accordance with his the balance between how much he or she is the victim of the circumstances, or how much he or she is the master of her destiny. So now the next question that I would ask you is, if you were to do what Beethoven did and turn within, that is, refuse to react, but try to listen to what is unfolding in the depth of your being, what is the quality that you feel is coming through at this moment, irrespective of the circumstances outside? Okay, well that should again happen quite spontaneously, so it shouldn't take much time. And of course now the question that I'd like to ask you is, of course, was it the same quality or not? And the one that you would have liked to develop. So please hands up those for whom it was the same quality, and those for whom it was a different quality. That's right. So one my hypothesis, up to a point, there's a reason why there are cases where it is the same thing. In fact, it is rather remarkable that in some cases it is the same quality. That is what in science today is called concatenation. That is a constellation, if you like, of circumstances whereby the problems that we're meeting outside act like catalysts in order to call upon the resourcefulness in our being, and we just meet those problems that are needed in order to develop the particular quality that we need at this moment. That's a simplistic way of looking at it would be to imagine that there's a wizard guru up there who is manipulating our lives and in order to help us to unfold our purpose, so that whatever happens is not random, but there's some purpose behind it. But that, as I say, rather simplistic solution. I don't think it's as simple as that. So then there's this case of where there's this wonderful concatenation of the way circumstances are weaving themselves into a pattern that forces us into unfolding our potentialities. That might be the case of many people. One thing that we must know is this, and that is that stress has its part to play in life. It's a positive part to play in life. Instead of grumbling about it, we should consider every bit of stress that we have as a catalyst. It doesn't mean that we react to it, we use it as a catalyst. But Beethoven was doing, for example, he would probably have never found that beautiful melody if it hadn't been that he had been bullied by the outside world and had therefore found a way of calling upon the resourcefulness in his being. Now, one thing, well, several things that become clear to me. One is that much as we would like to try to develop qualities, the qualities that we like to develop, it just doesn't work. Try as we may. And I've often wrecked my brain to understand why. And it occurs to me that, of course, the best answer would be, well, has been to try to remember the way that I was taught composition at the École Normale de Musique in Paris. In fact, we can learn very much about creativity by learning something about how creativity is taught in art or music or poetry or drama and so on. How do you teach a composer to compose? Can't tell him what to do, of course. And I remember that we used to come to our class feeling rather insecure because we weren't very happy about our compositions. And we were hoping that Nadia Boulanger would say, well, it's not very good, but I'll give you another chance, try again. Oh no. She would say, which is the part of the composition you like least? I would say, yes, well, this part here. Of course, she agreed. It was the part that was the least good. And she would say, well, why do you think it's not as good as the other? And then I'd say, well, perhaps we would answer, or perhaps we didn't know the answer. Sometimes she would provide the answer, and she would say, I bet that you composed this at 3 o'clock this morning in view of to get ready for our meeting. In other words, you were working it out in your mind. And that's why it didn't work. You were not listening to what is coming through in the depth of your being. And in order to listen to what's coming through, one has to be able to, well, to use the word of Buddha, to surround oneself with a zone of silence and place a sentinel at the doors of perception. We did this very perfunctorily a moment ago, like listening in to what's coming through in the depth of our being. But I'm not sure to what extent one can do that like that, off the cuff. It takes a lot of doing to learn how to turn within. And what is more, by the very by the very pursuit that we had, which was to try and conceptualize what was the quality that were coming through, we spoil it. I mean, we distort it. This is like if a scientist tries to examine an electron, he can only examine it by using a photon, and the photon will distort the electron, so, I mean, the functioning of the electron, so there's no way of knowing it the way it is. So it would be much better if we could learn how to get in touch with our feelings rather than conceptualize it with our mind. You know that most of the time we are grappling with our concepts of our problems instead of our real problems. And that's why modern psychologists are teaching people to get in touch with how they feel rather than what they think. And of course, you know, the thinking process is, how can I say, it's the way in the human being. Let us say, put it this way, our thoughts are the waste products of the thinking process. And so the thinking process is like a stream of water, and then you have these little drops that get detached from the stream. And those are what our thoughts. In fact, we're using, all the time we're using static words instead of dynamic words like my thoughts. There's no such thing as my thoughts. There's my thinking process. Or even there's no such thing as me. Now, it's going to be, as I say, it's going to be quite a process to learn how to get in touch with the deeper spring heads of our being. Most of us are living at the surface. Perhaps you realize to what extent the outer world, I say the outer world, actually, let us say the way the world appears to us, which is not the way things are, but the way it appears, the kind of impact that the world as such as it appears to us has upon our consciousness. And the simplest ways of ascertaining that would be simply to close your eyes and set your eyes at infinity and imagine that you are looking, that your eyes are, let's say, the headlamps of a car, for example, and breaking through the dark. Now, should you open your eyes, you would find that your eyes would be forced to focus right away by the objects in the room. In this case, by my person here. Now, supposing that you refuse to let your eyes be forced into focus, and you would see a blur, wouldn't you? Now, supposing that you would just bring your glance a little bit closer, but still offset from the usual focus, and then you begin to discover the eternal faces of people behind their physical faces. And you'd be in ecstasy, as I am all the time, because seeing such beautiful faces. And I'm like a mirror in which I wish you could see yourselves. But in order to do that, one has to offset one's glance from, and the only way of offsetting, well, what is behind it all is a kind of doubt as to the validity of one's perception. I mean, as to the ultimacy of one's perception. And if you study a little bit of physics, and especially physiology with Karl Pribram, for example, you'll realize that the impression that we have in the physical world is a far cry from the physical world. I mean, I could go into this, like, for example, we only experience 1/50th of the whole electromagnetic field, for example. We only hear a very small range of the sound, and so on. And if you look at a house, you see a house from one angle, it doesn't mean you've seen the house, you've just seen it from one angle. Those are just a few examples of the limitation within which we are functioning, and we think that we are really seeing things the way they are. That's, of course, what the Hindus call Maya. There's more to it than that, and I'd like to, this is, as I said, I will have to give some explanations before we go any further into our experiential work. I have to work with a few paradigms. First of all, let us say that, okay, let's take the more general one first. I'll refer to the case of Dr. Edgar Mitchell, you know, the astronaut who landed on the moon, who led us in a meditation, believe it or not, at Omega Institute 2 years ago. And all that he did was to relive before us his experiences. He was hurtling down through space back to Mother Earth again from the moon. And he said, my body was exulting in anticipation of the thought of getting back home again. But I had gained another sense of identity. He calls it space identity. And I realized that my body was limiting, my body consciousness was drawing me into a limited sense of identity. and I was tending to lose my cosmic identity, which I had just discovered. Now that's a very good paradigm for spirituality. That's what is meant by spirituality. It's something like, for example, a person leaving her village and going on a world tour and then coming back to her village again and can never think the same way as he or she thought before. Or let us say a cell of the body that were able to discover itself as the expression of the software of the whole body. Just imagine that we human beings are able to see the totality of which we are the expression, instead of thinking ourselves as a limited being. Well, now I'll give you a few examples that, you see, what we're going to do, we're doing as a preparation is to undo a lot of our assumptions. And that's the only way in which we can bring about any change in ourselves. Otherwise we'll stay exactly the same we are. So it might be painful to, go without crutches, but that's the only way to progress in life. Well, let's start with a paradigm in physics. That is that the body itself, well, it seems to have a skin, but actually there are aspects of the body that are not limited by any boundary. For example, the magnetic field peters out at some, let's say it gets diffused in the total magnetic field of the planet, and there's no boundary. So that, you see, we have this idea that we are a definite entity because of our skin, because we think that we're limited by our skin. But as soon as we realize that we are also a magnetic field, then we start overcoming this idea of being a limited person. Then the next paradigm was actually, very recently, a scientist came to me after one of my seminars and said, well, Vilayat, you're saying a lot of things which I can confirm now because I've made experiments with a new field which is not one of the four fields recognized in science, but, well, it's a reality. And it's related to the electromagnetic field, but it does extend much further than the magnetic field that you're talking about, which is, in the case of most people, can't be measured within an inch or so of the body. But in this case, of course, it extends far further, and as a matter of fact, as you say, pieces out, it gets further and further away from the body. And then, when you consider the aura, perhaps you know that the physical body emits photons. When I say that, it may be the other way around. Maybe the physical body is formed within that mode, which is the aura. But there's always conversion of protons, alpha photons and electrons. But when you realize that the eyes, every part of the body, emits light waves which travel through space at a speed of 186,000 miles a second, then you realize that you are everywhere at the same time, because the aura light is considered as physical matter by the scientists. So that means that our body is actually diffracted throughout the universe, and actually like the photons that is emitted by our aura hits the stars. So it's not just the stars. And as a matter of fact, on the other hand, we can realize also that the body is made out of the fabric of the planet, which, well, originally it was a molten mass like the sun, and probably part of the sun, or then the companion to the sun. There are different views in science about that, the origin of the planet. But at least when you realize that your body is actually the outcome of the radiance of the universe, and that the universe is like a sea of light, well then, our idea of ourselves changes a lot from the time that we discover what we are. Now, I must say this, and this is really one of the leitmotifs that will run through this seminar, and which is, I would say, the very definition of spirituality. I've been trying for a long time to try and, what we really mean by spirituality. I think it's to be found in the word of Plotinus, that Greek philosopher, Neoplatonic philosopher who lived in the 3rd century, and who said, that which we fail to experience in what we call the outer world, that which we fail to discover in contemplation, we seek to experience in the outer world. Spirituality is a different mode. It's a mode of discovery instead of experiencing. You discover yourself to be that which you tried to experience, which you thought was outside yourself. It's a different mode altogether. And that's why what's holding a lot of people back from their meditations is because they hope to experience. Whereas it's discovery, self-discovery instead of experience. It has to do with one's sense of identity. What Dr. Edgar Mitchell was saying is that he discovered an identity that he didn't know about before. So now the first paradigm that I was talking about was this. We may think of ourselves as a vortex rather than a cell. Now, a vortex is known to us as a whirlpool, for example, or a whirlwind. You know that the whirlpool does not have a frontier, and that's a very good model of what we are. There's no boundary between us and what we call the universe. The whirlpool can only, whatever it is, because it doesn't have a frontier, can only maintain it. It's an organization, let's say, within the lake, can only maintain itself by continually diffusing and continually reforming itself. And in the same way, if we want to progress, we will have to know how to lose ourselves and not to find ourselves again. That is the basis of the alchemical process, and it's one of the things that we're going to follow in the course of this day. Solve et coagulate, dissolve and then rebirthing is a word that is being used these days, but it's restricted to just a certain extent and trying to extend that experience. However, I don't think that it's good that paradigm is complete. It's a good paradigm because it will help us to overcome the thought that we are a fraction of the universe. And you see, that here is where we are reconciling the irreconciliables. And perhaps the best model here would be that of the DNA of the body, because every cell carries within itself the software of the whole body. But why is it then that there's some cells are hair and others are mucus and so on and so forth, bone or whatever, cartilage? Because although every DNA code carries, as I say, full code, I mean the nucleus of every cell carries within it the code of the whole body, but most of the genes are turned off and only certain are active. In the same way we can say that we carry within ourselves the entire universe. Potentially, it's a baffling thought, but only a very small fraction of the bounty of the universe ever becomes manifest or existentiated in us, let's say, actuated in us. But then, just like, imagine a picture of the genes of the DNA would be like a piano with a lot of thousands of keys, and most of them are scotch tape, so you limit it in the melody you can play, but you can de-scotch tape them, and it's all there, of course. So, anyway, the idea is to think, these are the ideas that we find in meditation. You see, to think of yourself as being I use the word the expression of the totality. Perhaps we could use another model which is a little more clear, and that is a wave in the ocean. One thinks that the wave emerges from the ocean. Not at all. It's just because, well, the wave doesn't have a frontier, it doesn't have a boundary. It is a whole universe I mean the whole ocean that emerges in each wave. So if you think of yourself thus, you overcome the thought of being a fragment of a totality. And that is exactly that kind of oceanic feeling that a lot of mystics talk about. And believe me, it's not just hallucinating, it's really discovering aspects of one's being that one never thought about. One could say that most of us are functioning at the small end, let's say, of our being. Let's think of ourselves as code, for example, and the small end, that's where we function. We think that we are that person that we think we are, and so on and so forth. Consciousness is focalized, sees things from a certain vantage point. Behind that, there's the consciousness of the totality. Just like, for example, behind the consciousness of the bee, there's a consciousness of the beehive. And I'm sure that in the case of the bees, perhaps the consciousness of the beehive is even stronger than that of the individual bees. So we're talking about a few models we're using a few models just to shake our ordinary, everyday assumptions as in preparation for what we're going to do. Now, as I was beginning to say, we aren't, however, the model of the vortex is not totally complete or satisfactory, ultimate, because in fact, well, for one thing, we do have an impact on the... for one thing, we can operate some selectivity. We're not just the product of the random build-up of forces in the universe. We have some choice in the elements that we want to take in and those that we want to use and so on and so forth. So maybe, after all, we're not just the vortex. There's something more about us than that. And so maybe we're a kind of cross between the vortex and a cell, which has a membrane, but the membrane, let's say, is porous, and so it allows a lot of things coming through, but still there's some kind of selectivity taking place. And what is more, we are able to work upon the environment. Actually, the vortex does. The whirlpool, that's where the whirlpool lives. There's the center that's working on the invisible center of the cyclone, let's say, that's working on the environment. But let's say that we are a matrix. Well, let's start with saying a template. The template forces the material into a mode, doesn't it? That's what a template is. It absorbs whatever it is in the environment into a mode, into a form. It imprints a form upon the material that's given to it. And so the same thing with us. We are a template in that we do have a way of imprinting our idea of the way things should be upon society, for example, inasmuch as we have some authority in our lives. Otherwise we're just like corks on the surface of the sea. Now, I would rather use the word matrix than template, because the template is, after all, static, whereas the matrix is a living reality. I mean, it is dynamic. It's self-motivated. And now I'd say one of the second conclusions that I came to recently, and that is that the psyche, our psyche, has its DNA also. And that DNA is, like the DNA of the cells, does respond to feedback. These are the latest views in biology. 10 years ago, most biologists thought that the DNA was constant. Now we realize that the DNA does pick up feedback, does adapt itself to the immune system, for example. But secondly, that the DNA has its own, how can I say, ability to evolve, its own ability to mutate. It's an extraordinary thing that has its own self-motivating faculty. And so what occurs to me is that within our being, let's say, there is a natural growth that takes place in the, let's say, the coding of our psyche. But that natural growth, let's say, the blossoming, let's say, that takes place in the depth of our being, requires our attention. And unless we give it the attention and the protection it needs from the environment, it will be aborted. And I think this happens all the time in most of us. Those qualities, those second qualities we were listening in, coming through in our being, unless we give them the proper attention, unless we're aware of them and really protect them, they will never come through. Just like there's a lot of blossom that never comes through, never ever becomes apple. And that's the thing that concerns me very greatly, that we're meeting all the time the emergencies rather than dealing with the important things. And the support system in our lives takes over, so that we're, as I say, we're adapting, we're running about, rushing and answering, as I say, all the needs from outside, and not dealing with the most essential question, which is the unfoldment of our being, which will eventually enable us to be much more able to meet the emergencies than the way we're doing now. And that's the reason for the need for a retreat, a spiritual retreat, as long as that spiritual retreat is conducted with a lot of know-how, and it does, believe me, it does take a lot of know-how to know how to lead a retreat. Because one is going through a process of transformation. Now, one more paragraph. And that is that, oh yes, it's again, oh, there are a few more, sorry. Well, to understand the meaning of this inverted space I'm talking about, and talking about the way the physical world appears to us. Well, this is an experiment by Dr. David Bohm, who's one of the most eminent physicists in our time, London, Berkeley College, who well, this is it. One drops a drop of black ink in glycerin in a centrifuge, and it's on the centrifuge, and, well, you can't see it anymore. It's been sort of diluted in the glycerin. Okay, you reverse the centrifuge, and lo and behold, the drop of black ink reappears. Okay, well then you drop, after dropping the black ink, you drop a drop of red ink, and then you reverse the centrifuge. And then the drop of red ink reappears before the black. A question you could ask yourself is, how do the particle of black ink, don't they have to wait for the particle of red ink to come through? So, what Dr. David Bohm is talking about, what he's saying is that the universe such as we know it is what he calls the explicate state, where you see the drops of ink, you know, each object is located in a different place. But behind that, there's the intricate state, which most of us are not aware of, in which everything is everywhere. And that is the state of radio waves, for example. They are not specific by their location in space. They are specific by their frequency. So Dr. David Bohm is speaking about a different mode of space-time relationship to the one that we're used to. And what he's saying is that what we experience of the physical world is just the surface. Let's say, like, you can make the same comparison between the sound of the radio and radio waves. And our minds are able to pick up sounds of the radio, but are not able to extrapolate between the wave interference, the waves and the wave interference pattern behind the radio waves. I don't know whether you understand my language. You see the difference now. We are geared, we are, how can I say, conditioned to live at the surface. And so for all the operations like crossing the road and the supermarket, buying things or filling in our tax forms or insurance forms, for that our usual way of thinking is nicely, or let's say nicely geared. When it comes to understanding our role in life or the unfoldment of our being, is absolutely insufficient. It's just like Euclidean geometry is okay for small distances. When it comes to large distances, it's insufficient. And so our ordinary thinking is okay for ordinary operations. But when it comes to those great problems as to what is my part, the part that I have to play in the universe? What is the purpose of my life? Those are questions we don't know how to answer, because we're still thinking in our limited way of thinking. And now it has a practical application in the unfoldment of our personality, because we have an image of ourselves, we call it self-image, and we're so convinced that we are the person that we think we are, with all those qualities that we attribute to our personality, that we get ourselves stuck in our self-image, and there's no way in which we'll ever progress, as long as we identify ourselves with our present personality. So that means that if we want to progress, we have to accept to, as St. John of the Cross says, accept to be nothing. He says, to become what you are, you will have to pass through a phase when you are nothing. So that is a solvate, the dissolution of the chemical process. One goes through a breakdown of one's personality. And that's creativity. You see, creativity, there's a risk about creativity. It's like, what if you go through a breakdown in personality and you're not any better than you were, in fact you're worse than you were before? That is a risk. Then all creativity involves a risk. Now, don't be afraid, because, as says Nadia Boulanger, we would have been very glad if Nadia Boulanger had said, well, start a new conversation. Well, you can't do that with your personality, actually. You can't really break down altogether. It would be rather catastrophic. I mean, it does happen to people with schizophrenia, but I wouldn't advise you to go through that. But so Nadia Boulanger would say, well, this part that you don't like, now work with that. And so we thought, okay, well, I would have preferred I'd been able to write a new composition. Oh, no, you've got just that part. You come back. There you go. Yes, you work with it, and you find that it's a little bit better than it was before. You come back again, and she said, that's a collage. You can't just fit this into that. The whole composition has got to be reshuffled then because of this new elements come in. You can't just put it in like that. Well, now that's the way to work with your personality. You have to work organically. But it doesn't mean breaking down altogether. But it does mean shifting a lot of things in one's personality to bring about that quality that you, a moment ago, had wished to develop. Not that simple. And another paradigm is again in the words of Dr. David Bohm, when he once said, the physical world such as we know it is just a ripple in the ocean of reality. The physical world such as we know is just a ripple in the ocean of reality. And one could say that normally we are only functioning in a very small slice of our being, body, psyche, and there's all that gamut of, how can I say, I don't want to use the word bodies, but that's the way one says it, or say dimensions of our being that we're not using. And the consequence is that, of course, we will never be anything different to the way we are unless we know how to discover our identity at those higher levels. I use the word higher. Some of you may not like that word. You can call it cosmic if you like. Now, in this respect, I would like to refer to the works of Dr. Stanislav Grof, who has been working at Esalen for many years, using a drug therapy, which I must say I can't approve of myself, except he's doing it experimentally, because, as you know, the drug just disforms or disfigures altogether one's thinking, distorts one's thinking, and so on. But it does bring into focus aspects of oneself that one does not usually know about or recognize. In fact, it's doing precisely what has been done, but without that danger of the distortion by meditation for eons of time. The extraordinary thing is that our body, the cells of our body, maybe the DNA of the cells of our body, carries the memory of the bodies of our parents and ancestors, so that our consciousness is just like the tip of the iceberg, is just functioning at in a very small edge of the reality of our being. And there's all of that deeper, those deeper layers of our being that we are normally not aware of. Not only that, but we do also have the memory of elements that have not been transmitted bodily. A very curious thing. It's a very baffling to science, of course. It's what the Indians call reincarnation. We carry, and probably the reason, one of the explanations would be that we're not just a body and so on and so forth. We have different bodies, and so those other bodies carry the memory of previous states. Well, why, you could ask yourself, why is it important? Well, it's important because, as I say, we are functioning within a very small slice of our being, and the other thing is that we're limited by a limited vantage point, which is okay, as I say, for middle-range activities. But I think that at least the more sensitive people are motivated by a real nostalgia, well, for awakening, for insight, for to lift oneself beyond any limitation whatsoever. It's the ultimate striving of the human being to excel himself or herself. It's the same thing that causes mountaineers to keep on beating their records, or the sportsmen, or whatever, composer, whatever. And if one does not have that, then one will never become, as I say, what one could be if one would be what one might be. And secondly, well, one is going to be disenchanted, and I think one of the worst things that people suffer from most is disenchantment in life. And so, as I say, it's very much to gain by study, and then of course the practice of methods that have been used in the East that have become rather stereotyped and shrouded in superstition and a lot of things that are outdated, you see, and I think it's important to get the essence of it all and try to work with that and make it a reality in our day and age. Now, amongst the, you see, behind this paradigm is, I think I can quote Buddha, who said, where consciousness has been carried beyond the point where it is operating as a personal consciousness, I say, beyond the boundaries of what one thinks is the personal self, that is one's self-image, then the memory of the whole past of one's being re-emerges, and what is more, one becomes aware of all the planes of reality instead of the few planes that one is normally aware of. That's what happens in fact, that's what happens in the moment of illumination, that there's often depicted Buddha having sat under the tree for 49 days and nights, and at the end of that there was that moment of illumination where consciousness was, as he says himself, those are his words, was carried beyond the point where it operates as an individual consciousness. Now, in most of us, consciousness is simply operating from the focal center of the person. One assumes that one is the person one thinks one is, and that the universe is other than oneself, outside oneself, all those things which we take for granted all the time. that means that, let's say, awakening would consist in working with consciousness in such a manner that it is able to extend beyond its normal limits, and as a consequence, not only the memory of the past will come back, but will have a kind of insight into the meaningfulness which propels one through life. Let's say the motivations. I'm thinking of a paradigm here, and that is, imagine a cell of the body that would be able to discover itself as being the expression of the body, instead of thinking of itself as a fraction of the body. That would be an example. You see, it's discovery instead of experience, you see. Or then, to go further, imagine that a cell of the body were able to see how it unfolded in the course of time, like in the embryo and the fetus, and right back in the bodies of the ancestors and so on, to be able to see itself as an expression of the whole forward march of evolution. That imagine what would happen to a cell to be able to overcome just thinking of itself as a cell. Can you imagine a cell in the body being a little bit annoyed about the pressure of another cell next to it, and then all of a sudden discovering. So then it would be, that's what we're doing, of course. That's what causes war. Thinking of ourselves as an entity, and then that person is doing me harm, and I want to get better, one knows the other, and so on and so forth. So I think we know very well. Imagine if one were able to see the whole thrust of the universe manifesting as one. And that would be looking to the past, of course, but seeing the whole past, how it's coming through. But furthermore, we're able to see, project forward, like, what this is all leading to, where it is, where we're going, like, what is my objective, what is my purpose in life? Supposing that you are able to see yourself in the universe, instead of just be sitting here in this room. Those are the very powerful thoughts which can shake our complacency and create real transformation in our being. And I'd like to say that there's no way in which one can bring about transformation in one's being unless one uses very strong methods. And you know, they say leopard never changes spots. Well, it's not, I don't know about leopards, but it's, one can be totally transformed. Our people are absolutely transfigured beyond recognition. But it takes something very dramatic. And as I say, it takes a knowledge of how creativity works. So we have, we're going to study this, see how we can enhance the creativity in our being. But that will be our end objective, our goal. Prior to that, we have to prepare ourselves, and that means going through a process of dissolution, a breakdown which, as the psychologist Xing said, may aver itself to be a breakthrough. So I'll be putting you through what one calls a retreat process. I don't like the word retreat. I rather use the word treat than retreat, but there's, in French, one says, reculer pour mieux sauter, which means that one has to sometimes learn how to step back in order to thrust forward. So what we shall be doing in the beginning will be absolutely counter to what our objective is. Our objective is to become wonderful beings, to become beautiful beings, and to build a beautiful world of beautiful beings. And that means to involve ourselves in life and achieve and unfold. But just like Beethoven, in the case that I talked about, in order to be able to call upon all the resourcefulness of our being, we'll have to learn how to withdraw, find a place of great peace and silence in our being, and as I say, discover the emotion that moves the universe within our being. I remember a word of, well, I'm, how can I say, paraphrasing the words of Buddha. And Buddha once said, well, he didn't say it, I'm paraphrasing. Everybody is caught in their storms in their teacups. Buddha would have said that. It's in English. We're all caught in our storms and our teacups. And missing the great celebration ends. And you can see that happening. Not only we are caught up in our personal vantage point, our consciousness, but of course in our personal emotions. And that is because our assessment of, not only our assessment of the physical world is not reliable, but our assessment of the situations in which we are is not reliable. And we're so convinced that the situations are the way we think they are. Now, I don't know whether it's happened to you to have wished for something many years ago, and now to be glad that it never happened, or that you're sorry that it did happen. That means that now you're assessing things differently to the way you were assessing them then. And so if that's the case, then your present assessment is probably wrong too. So we can't rely upon our assessments. And so what Buddha leads us to is questioning one's opinion. In fact, freedom from opinion. Well, what I've been saying during this last hour has been destroying one by one all our assumptions we are so convinced about and we based our lives upon. But this is only the first half. The destroying of the Shiva act is only the first half. The second half is, of course, cosmic consciousness, where one is aware of the bounty of one's being, and one is aware that one's consciousness is the divine consciousness looking into the universe. That's a positive aspect, and one could say that actually there are two awakenings. One is an awakening out of the existential state. We'll have to go into that a little later. That is, for example, you see yourself as the visitor from outer space, like in the case of Dr. Edgar Mitchell. You see yourself as the visitor from outer space who has donned a body out of the fabric of the planet. And you can extricate yourself from your existential condition. Now, that's one awakening. The other awakening is the opposite. It's the awakening in life. My father calls the first one the awakening of man into God consciousness, and the second, the awakening of God into man consciousness. Now, that's saying it in a very simple way. I say it's all over the stuff, so one can say that it is the awakening from the existential condition into a transcendental state, and the second one is the awakening from, let's say, of the total consciousness of the universe into each fragment of itself, into each focal point of itself, focalization of itself. I don't know whether you can follow me there, but it's, we'll be working with that a little later. Yeah, just one more point in this introduction, because after that we're going to start doing the actual work. And that is that the clue to working with creative imagination is working with dreams, or rather a state which is very similar to dreams, which is one calls reverie. That is a state where one is suspended between what one calls the awakened consciousness, being awake, which is actually really the better word is diurnal consciousness, and the dream state. Now, if one is able to maintain oneself at the threshold between those two, one is, for one thing, one is grasping, but not with one's personal consciousness, but still there's some awareness of what is coming through, but it comes through in form of images, symbols. And secondly, one is able to have some handle over what is coming through. And that's, I know in most cases, there's no way in which you could influence your dreams, but if you're in a state of reverie, there's a little bit of handle you have over what is, over the unfoldment of the imagery. And so I would say that rather than doing what Dr. Sandicroft has been doing, which is to let the elements of the unconscious emerge and erupt into the conscious mind, is bring the light of consciousness into the unconscious. And being able to have some kind of a personal incentive in the way that one unfolds. The reason why I'm saying this is because I don't want you to think that I reduce creativity to just listening to what's coming through. And take the example of musicians improvising, for example, is a very good example of, we're in Nashville, city of music. It's a very good example. Take a group of musicians who are improvising. Now, if each one were doing his or her thing, it would be a cacophony. Now, if everyone was listening to a composer, then a conductor, they would not be creative. But if everyone is able to simply feel the trend that is coming through by listening to each other, and yet still customize the feeling of the group and giving it a personal imprint, then they will be creative. So creativity is two things at the same time, listening in and then going out on a limb with one's own incentive. And that's why when we started by talking about these two qualities, the one you'd like to develop and the one that is coming through at this time, I did not mean to say that I advocate just the one that's coming through instead of the one that you want to develop. But I would say that if there's a way of finding a blend, because all qualities are always blends anyway, a blend between these two qualities, then of course it would be perfect. Then you would really be creative. Well, I think you'll need a break now. So I'll say a quarter of an hour break, and then we'll continue at about which is doing it instead of hearing about it. So just imagine that you're somewhere in a cave in the Himalayas, instead of being in the center of Nashville, Tennessee. And you're a pilgrim. That is, you're trying to get into the mentality, into the attunement of a person who's on retreat, a hermit. I can tell you I've met some very wonderful beings very high up in the Himalayas. 12,000 feet or 14,000 feet. I've met beings who hadn't seen any other human being for over 11 years, maybe 12 years. Living up there where there's no food, living entirely on air, believe it or not. There's no food, and no communication with other people. Of course, people living in caves, low down, but in the forest, but eating the roots of the trees and things, but never go down back to civilization again. The power, the light, the insight of those people is beyond imagination. That a human being can be so transformed is the greatest evidence of the value of all those things that I've been talking about, what it does to a person. Now, of course, it's not my objective to advise people to become hermits. And my great problem is to see whether it is possible to do this right in the middle of life. And I must say the only way to do it, I think, is to program into our lives a moment of, a very deep relaxation, which one might call meditation, or mini retreats, let's say, written right into our activities. But the process that we're going to be following now is the opposite of what one seeks to do in everyday life. For example, in everyday life one would involve oneself in order to achieve and to live life fully. And here, in this case, one becomes detached and pursues freedom. But then when one realizes how one gets conditioned by the very fact that one involves oneself, then one realizes how valuable it would be if one would find a way of freedom in the middle of involvement. But first of all, let's practice it on retreat and then see how it can work in daily life. And a very good example of that would be, for example, to love without depending upon being loved. That would be a case in which one is involving oneself, and yet one is still affirming some detachment and supremacy, freedom. Okay, so the paradigm, the hermit is of the pilgrim is very appropriate, because the pilgrim has left his or her life behind. Well, as I said in French, reculer pour mieux sauter. Maybe one would be able to see things better if one was able to look at things with a certain perspective instead of being involved in things right away. One can't see the wood for the trees. Right? So there are invisible threads still linking you with your problems and so on and so forth. But we want to go on an excursion, how can I say, to free oneself from all those constraints upon one's thinking and one's understanding and one's consciousness. So let's say that we're in the pursuit of freedom. Now, we will have to undo a lot of mechanisms that have been mounted mechanisms, mental constructs. We sit in meditation, the first thing that happens is that one gets impacted by a lot of thoughts, random thoughts. One wonders what one is doing, sitting there, doing nothing, and so on. So one have to overcome all these things. So the first thing we're going to do is to work with consciousness in order to modulate consciousness from its ordinary setting. As I said, normally consciousness is focalized in the center. And you know, for example, a camera, if you, the lens of the camera reduces much of the richness of the landscape in order to be able to concentrate it on a piece of cardboard or celluloid. And so in the same way, our consciousness reduces the richness of the universe by acting in a lens-like way. Now we could shift it into a holographic, holistic, let's say, mode, in which case consciousness would be scattered in the universe instead of being centered. We can de-center consciousness. You know that if you have the choice between concentrating your glance on the letters of a book, for example, that you're reading, or then extending your glance over a large, vast landscape. Well, you can do the same in your consciousness. And this is what we're going to do. Call it the cosmic dimension meditation. So, now we're going to use a few techniques that are current in most esoteric schools. First of all, breathing techniques. Now, the reason for the use of breath is simply because, as you know, breath is not just a physical process, but one is participating in a rhythm, a pulsation, an ebb and flow of energy at all levels of one's being. And so the rhythm of one's physical breath affects the intake of energy and the electromagnetic field, the aura, all kinds of other levels of our being. The other thing is that, as you know, perhaps in the animal, there's a switch over very often from the catabolic to the anabolic condition and back to the catabolic. Catabolic animal is able to catch its prey, defend itself, deal with emergencies. Anabolic, the animal is able to sit in its cave and digest its food and doesn't have to be ready to jump to attention. The same thing with the human being. In our normal mode, we are in the catabolic state, ready to answer telephone calls and doors and bells and all kinds of things. And now we want to get into the anabolic state. The anabolic state is brought about by slowing one's breath. Now, most of the time, most of us breathe only 1/5 of the capacity of our breath, of our lungs. So, the amount of polluted gas. Well, first of all, exhale, and keep on exhaling, even after you think that you can't exhale any further. And now inhale without effort. You'll be taking in at least 5 times more oxygen than usual, which has an immediate effect upon one. All right. Now we're going to try and associate the pattern of thoughts with the breath. So, instead of identifying with what you think is your physical body with its boundary, which is skin, imagine that you are a magnetic field. It's a force field or biofield which extends, well, it extends without any boundary, eventually merging into the electromagnetic field of the planet, the geomagnetic field. But there's some kind of ebb and flow between the two. It's like when in an estuary, when the water of the salt water of the sea comes up the estuary, and then the other way, according to the tide, the salt water advances into the sea. So, some kind of exchange there. As you exhale, you are aware of the flow of your magnetic field, dispersing, interfusing, intermeshing with the magnetic field of the planet and eventually the universe. And as you inhale, you're conscious of the build-up of the energy of the universe building up, just like a wave. It's a whole sea that builds up as waves, you see. And that's what you are, the whole energy of the universe built up into a center, and that's what you are, that center. remember to breathe very slowly. Extend your exhaling each step, at each step, a little longer than before. Now, there are ideas that will help us in this. As we exhale, we can imagine the starry universe, not only the planetary system, but the galaxy, and then the clusters of galaxies, and the quasars, and, well, just the vastness of the universe beyond imagination. So let your mind be absolutely blown by the thought of the vastness of the universe as you exhale, and realize that you are actually not only a magnetic field, but later on it will be the aura, reaching right into the edges of the universe, dispersed and yet reaching right out. And the extraordinary thing is that your consciousness is able to reach into that vastness. And you notice that as your consciousness does this, so it becomes all-encompassing. It becomes decentered. It becomes all-encompassing. And you enjoy a sense of vastness. It is as though you were able to be everywhere at the same time. Which is partly true. And now as you inhale, you represent, as I said, the wave that emerges. I mean, it's not true the wave emerges from the sea. As I said, it's the whole sea that emerges as waves. So you are aware of all the bounty and the power of your being, of the universe that is building up as you. It will give you a great sense of power. Magnetism, that's what we have to start working with, magnetism, with energy. Discover in yourself the same power that moves the universe. The wider your consciousness extends, the more energy you're able to draw in or build up as you inhale. Okay, now, instead of thinking of yourself just as an magnetic field, think of yourself as an aura of light. It's not a hallucination, it's a fact. One can measure the biofield, the bioluminescence of a person in a laboratory. And the extraordinary thing is that the more one, this is mind over body, you see, the more one concentrates on light, the more photons one is emitting. So imagine your radiant aura that also is interspersed within the cells of the body. So one think it's only outside the body. As you exhale, and it gets, as I say, diffracted into the universe. As you inhale, realize that the universe is essentially a universe of radiance, which means light. And just like the waves that we imagined, it is the whole ocean of light that builds up in you. And at the moment of the peak, let's say, of the inhaling, and your aura burns more brightly. Sparkling with light. The effulgence. As you exhale, then you radiate that light consciously. Right, now we're going to introduce one step further, and that is hold your breath between inhaling and exhaling. Not between exhaling and inhaling, only between inhaling and exhaling. So first exhale, inhale, and when you hold your breath, turn your eyeballs upwards, converging them towards the imaginary third eye. Now, the reason for that is that it stabilizes the thoughts. It stops the thoughts from moving about randomly. Particularly if you press the bottom of your tongue against your palate and hold your breath as long as you can, you find that the longer you exhale, the longer you can hold your breath. Well, the longer you inhale, and then the longer you can hold your breath. You only have your eyeballs turned upwards during the retention of breath. As soon as you exhale, you bring your eyes back into the normal position again. Okay, well now that was just a preparation for learning how to turn within in that inverted space we talked about. Well now, we already said as you exhale, your consciousness is spread out. As you inhale, the consciousness of the universe builds up as your consciousness, like the cone that I talked about. But as you hold your breath, you discover in the center of yourself something like a white hole, as the physicists are talking about, where new energy erupts into the present universe from other universes. White holes in space, not the same thing as black holes. The opposite. New energy is being sucked into this universe from other universes. At that point, which is called the edge of the black hole, it's a kind of critical point. Space is reversed. It passes through what is in modern physics called a singularity, just like in a black hole. Now, you must understand that space is only meaningful where there is matter. Now, as we withdraw, that is, we turn within, I suppose maybe the best thing would be to think of the center of the cyclone, for example, which is a vacuum, you see. There's no space anymore. There's no, space doesn't have any meaning in the vacuum. And that's the vacuity that Buddha is speaking about. sunyata. Now you hold that state as long as you can between inhaling and exhaling, and in order to be able to really discover this inner space, think that the physical world, such as it appears, is at the edge there, outside there, at the edge, at the periphery of your being, and is trying to force your consciousness into at their surface. And you are doing exactly as one does when one's about to go to sleep. You are withdrawing your attention by the fact of being detached, of being disinterested in the environment. It's the only way, just like if you were sitting in a room and reading a book and somebody were to come in and you wouldn't turn your glance toward that person, you would just continue reading, something like that, you see. So absolute detachment and disinterestedness in the environment. And even doubt as to the validity of the kind of perception that one has of the environment. That will help you to get more detached from it. Even a certain amount of disenchantment. One of the images again is swimming under the water. And so the world is such as you thought it, up there at the surface, and you're swimming below. Now you had been swimming at the surface, and you thought you saw water lilies, but now when you plunge under the water, you realize that the roots of all those water lilies are so intertwined that in fact it's just one network of roots. And so at the surface it seems like there are different water lilies, but in the depth it's all one reality. Now apply that to your perception of the physical world. And so the world such as you think it is up there, with the people sitting on the beach or in a cafe, that perception is the way things look when you're at the surface. But now, when you're in the depth, you realize that behind those what seem separate individuals, there is a network of commonality, let's say, that they all have in common. It's like the cells of one body. In a certain perspective it looks like different cells, in another perspective it looks like one body, it breaks out in cells. Now in order to do that, you have to yourself sink into a state of relaxation which goes far beyond what most people ever experience. And at this, without falling into a state of trance. So it's the other way around. It's on one hand one is sinking one's personal consciousness, on the other hand one is awakening an impersonal consciousness, both at the same time. So it's not just flopping. It's a very great art to know how to relax, but almost as deeply as in auto-hypnosis, while at the same time never losing consciousness. In fact, the other way around, enhancing consciousness. So these are some of the methods that are used in the East. It is thinking that the body disperses in the wind and four winds, like when it's being cremated, for example. Or, well, you just have to think of the aura. Just think of the fact that our body is strewn out in space anyway. And second thing is the thoughts. Because if you turn within, you'll find that you may be able to cut out the outer world, but the physical world, but you will be caught in encapsulated in your own psyche, in your own thinking. And so one has to scatter the thoughts, and the way to do it is to devalidate them, as I said earlier on, and free oneself from the impact. We'll realize that they impact one in exactly the same way as the appearance of the physical world forces one's glance into focus. In the same way, one's thoughts are forced and focused by the conditioning, let's say, of mental constructs. So withdraw from the conceptualization of the mind into a deeper place in the mind where thoughts are, let's say, thinking. There's thinking instead of thoughts. And thinking is absolutely, like, for example, you have access into the thinking of the universe instead of your personal thinking. It's like a deeper layer of one's being where the thinking becomes more and more impersonal, just like the radio waves, more like an interference pattern, and they are processed into concepts at the surface. And now we're diving down and letting the concepts, leaving concepts at the surface, and diving down into that deeper layer of our being. It's something like what happens to the trees in the winter when the energy has withdrawn from the leaves and is going down into the concentrating in the roots. Now think of yourself as being roots rather than a tree, and those roots are intertwined with the roots of all other people, who is all just one network of roots. Now, you will be thinking about people, or you can think of people, but if you do this, you'll find that you reach them exactly the same way as you would be reaching the water lilies if you followed them up from the roots upwards. You surfaced, and as you were surfacing, you would change your mode of experience from the implicate to the explicate, but still you would see the water lily as it looks from the roots, from internally, let's say. And so in the same way, instead of going to visit a person, using transport, you would, and sitting and talking to that person, be getting into the consciousness of that person, and experiencing what it's like to be that person, rather than thinking of that person as other than yourself. In other words, that person is another yourself. And that's why you can experience what it's like to be that person. But then it's because your concept of your person has extended to such an extent that it's become impersonal, and therefore it's the same roots as that of the other person. Oh, it means that one has to shift one's sense of identity and discover oneself to be the nameless and the formless and the timeless and the spaceless. Means one is not labeled by a particular sense of identity any longer. One is universal, or let's say at least one is discovering one's universal dimension. One does not limit oneself to either the image that one sees of oneself in the mirror or one's self-image of one's personality. Since one does not identify with one's body, space has no relevance. So whether your body is sitting here or there, not relevant. In fact, in this state, space has lost its meaning. And think that you are everywhere in space, as we already said. And time has lost its meaning. That is, you experience yourself as always, you envision yourself as always having existed prior to your birth, and you will exist after your death. So one is discovering the eternal dimensions of one's being. And one realizes, of course, how limited one was in one's way of thinking about oneself in one's ordinary consciousness. Like a tree that was unaware of its roots, for example. Means that you suddenly become aware of always having existed prior to having inherited a body from your parents. Your memory is carried back prior to the moment of conception. Now, of course, there are different ways one could carry one's memory back through one's parents, back in that particular strand of, or that tuft of strands. But then what I'm suggesting is you carry your memory back into that state of your being prior to being embodied, being, say, involved in bodiness, having donned a body out of the body, the material of the planet accrued to you in the course of time, but prior to that moment, there was an existence beyond, well, a being beyond existence, let us say, beyond time and beyond space. And maybe some reminiscence of spheres of splendor, unmitigated, bountiful, which do tend to transpire in the physical world, wherever there's excellence, but one can experience the constriction of the human condition, while the existential condition that one was identifying with, and now one is free from that identification. It's in the mind, you see, it's in one's way of, one's perspective, you see, one's way of looking at oneself, or considering oneself. And the way to do it is this. You consider the body, and you think, isn't that extraordinary? My relationship with that body is that the body is made of the fabric of the planet, that means of the universe. Isn't that extraordinary that I have some kind of involvement with the fabric of the planet? I can make it move. I can make a tree move, and so I have a special relationship with it, and I can feel joy in it and pain in it. That's extraordinary, but it's something that has accrued to me and will eventually decay. And that sense of, well, yes, I have become my body too. That in the course of time, I have become my body, just like if I eat food, that food does become my body. So my body has become part of me also. That's true, but it's not of the same order as those aspects of my being that existed prior to the body. Now, there's a shift in one's sense of identity. One is extricating oneself from one's existential condition. Now you can consider the process of thinking. I was going to say your mind, but there's no such thing as mind, just a concept, a label, but you can consider the process of thinking and realize that it is a formation that took place just like the body was formed by the forces of life without you having participated in any way in its formation. In the same way, the thinking process is also, that's the way it has been conditioned by being programmed by the, let's say, the software of the universe. Now, it's true that you have some impact on your thinking. We have some impact on our thinking, just like we have some impact on our body. We can move this lump of flesh. Well, then we can also pilot the flow of thought and even find new dimensions in thinking. But it does not mean that we are our thoughts, because in fact it's even an indication that we're not our thoughts if we are able to manipulate them, whatever we mean by we. And now consider your personality very objectively. This personality has been inherited by not just my parents, my ancestors, right back into the animal kingdom and the vegetable kingdom and the mineral kingdom. It's all been formed in the course of, molded in the course of the eons of time. Why do I think it's me? It's something I've got to live with, just like I've got to live with my body. Perhaps one doesn't like the way that one's body is formed, but there's nothing one can do about it. So the same thing with the personality. So if you can disidentify with the personality, it gives you some kind of handle on the personality so that you can work with it exactly like an artist is able to work with the raw material at her disposal. And make of it a work of art. So it has come to be the way it is, but now I have some handle on it. Even as one has a handle on one's body, one can do a lot to improve one's body, and of course improve one's thinking. And the same is true of the personality. Now, so far that we've been following a process that is based on the Buddhist meditations, but the Sufi one is, I would say, complementary to this, and that is, well, my personality is like a plant, of which a plant is actually the unfoldment of a seed, the unfurling of a seed. And I thought that I was this plant, not realizing that in fact it is really the seed that has unfurled in a certain way, and there was much more richness in the seed than would ever come through in the plant, and so there's much more richness in my being than ever came through in my personality. But it's latent or virtual potential, and actually at the end of the cycle of the plant, the seed does emerge in the heart of the flower, and so the bounty that is latent within this personality is trying to come through, and as long as I think that I am that personality, I limit myself by that image and stand in the way of the bounty of my being coming through. So these views are complementary, as you see, but the ability to look at your personality with a certain amount of objectivity gives you freedom from identification with personality, and therefore gives you a chance of working with it. Now I'm going to reach the next stage, which is a little more difficult even than what we've done so far. And that is that the consciousness operating the human being operates in a lens-like way. As I said, it's a focalization. And of course it is a focalization of the consciousness of the whole universe that is focalized, so it's not, or polarized if you like. It's not like the waves in the sea, but it's more like the same reality, being focalized and sort of fragmented. Well, now, if you can watch your consciousness in its act of being aware without identifying with your consciousness, then you begin to awaken beyond the limitation of the purview of the consciousness, of the personal consciousness in its normal setting. And as you think to yourself, I see how things look from my personal point of view. But I can see that's just the way things look from my personal point of view, so I don't get caught up in it because I don't identify with it. You see, you can watch your consciousness watching a situation or an object, and you see, oh yes, looking at things from that point of view, of course, that's the way things do look. Like looking at the world from a landscape through a lens, so we know that's the way it looks. But we know that that's not the way it is, it's just the way it looks. So that's what you do. It's not the ultimate freedom, but it's a very advanced form of freedom. It is freedom from opinion, freedom from the personal outlook, freedom from Maya. But of course that's the negative side. The positive side is that one discovers that one's consciousness is, the Sufis would say, is the divine consciousness, is the consciousness of the totality that has become funneled down into a narrow, let's say, focal point. All of a sudden your consciousness becomes absolutely not just cosmic. That means all-encompassing, as we did earlier on, where you imagine your consciousness was spread out throughout the whole universe. But it is transcendent. That is, you are able to see that which lies beyond what appears at the surface or what is experienced through the senses. For example, you can see the software behind the hardware of the universe. That's what marks the transcendental dimension. It's the software as compared with the hardware. Before you saw the situation, now you see not just the cause of the situation or the whole chain of causes, but the purpose, in other words, the intention behind the programming. The programming, and then even beyond the programming, as I say, the intention behind it. Now that's awakening. That's what in the East is called awakening. Awakening beyond the narrow purview of the personal vantage point of consciousness. All of a sudden you feel as though you had awakened, and you realize that up to this point you've been caught in your vantage point like everybody else. All of a sudden you see everybody is caught in their own vantage point, and you have awakened, and you see what's behind everything, and everybody seems to be manipulated and moved by emotions and assessments and drives of all kinds, mental constructions and so on. And you can unmask the hoax of it all and realize to what extent you had lost not only your freedom but your insight by just going along with the programming, the conditioning in which most of us have been brought up. Now, the latest in that progression that we've been following towards a transcendental shift of consciousness is what happens in deep sleep, where there's no consciousness. As you see, where there's consciousness, there's experience. And in sleep, there is some experience of that can be evidenced by the rapid eye movements, when it's seeing images being projected and so on. Whereas in deep sleep, no eye movement at all, very lot of physiological changes take place. There is no more consciousness because there's no more experience. There's discovery, not experience. The experience is always of otherness. There's no sense, everything is one. That's, of course, very difficult for us to understand, but the practical application of it is that one has lost one's personal identity and experiences oneself as the totality. It's like that cone that I was talking about. We've been operating at the little end of the cone, and as we've been awakening, we shift our sense of identity to the large end, and then we don't know anymore. We remember having thought that we were the person we thought we were, and we remember thinking that we've got a body somewhere there on the earth, on the planet, and we were involved with people and situations and so on, but it seems like a trip that one got oneself constrained, like Dr. Edgar Mitchell realized how the body was constraining his sense of spatial identity. One experiences the constraint of the existential condition upon one's ability to act, upon one's consciousness, upon one's thoughts, upon one's emotions, and particularly upon one's sense of identity. And now one is free. Imagine you're not just free of your self-image, that is, of your personality, plus all the other things, but free of the sense of being an individual, awakening to being the totality. I know it sounds perhaps for some even sacrilegious, and anyway beyond the grasp of most people, but it is the ultimate truth, and it's the ultimate awakening. There's a sense of having extricated oneself from one's existential condition. Means that one can have an overview over the act of existence, and one sees the whole of existence as a kind of trip that one got involved in, and one sees it was in the mind, in one's way of thinking, and now one is free from that particular bent, like the Sufi Faridud-Natar, who says, "Oh man, if you only knew that you're free, it is your ignorance of your freedom that is your captivity." And what made those rishis that I talked about in the mountains, and the dervishes, just like kings or queens, is because they had freed themselves from the limitation of the personal individuality and were conscious of their cosmic dimension. And that's what what Christ said when he says, "Be perfect as your Father." That means we all carry the divine inheritance, but if we are not aware of it, then we can't affirm it. That's the ultimate goal. I know it's far beyond the reach of most people immediately, but anyway, that's a goal. They're extremely positive, jubilant, splendid, and glorious. The purpose of life, that God may become a reality in every so-called fraction of himself. That perfection of the totality may manifest in each fragment of the totality. All right, now we're going to, I don't know how far you were able to follow me here, but I'd like to give you a practice now that will help in turning within. And that is, you place, again, it's a breathing practice, you place, well, would you like to stretch for a moment? Perhaps you need to stretch a little bit. I have another quarter of an hour. I want to pack it in. So, place your thumbs very lightly on your ears and place the indexes of your fingers on on your eyelids, but turn your eyeballs upwards so you're not pressing the eyeballs with your fingers. It causes optic illusions. And then you place the fourth finger on your lips and middle finger on your nostrils. Now lift the fingers on your nostrils and exhale through both nostrils. Now inhale through the right nostril. Turn your eyeballs upwards. Press your tongue, it's about. Exhale through the right nostril. Once more. Inhale through right nostril. Turn your eyeballs upwards, hold your breath. Press your tongue, it's about. Exhale through right nostril. Once more. Now you take your hands away. Well, this practice will help you to turn within. It has placed sentinels at the doors of perception. Those are the sentinels. And one needs to find a very deep peace within oneself by relaxation of emotion, by that attitude of detachment and freedom. You might have had it was, of course, you can't experience much the first time, it has to be done repeatedly, but you might have noticed that it might have been an impression of light, but it's not like seeing light, it's more like feeling light. This is very difficult to describe, but you notice that the kind of light that you were experiencing, or that you were discovering, was all-pervading. It was not like the light that we experience in the world, which is radiated from the source of light. It was all-pervading. And the same thing with sound. The sound that you may have heard was like a kind of vast symphony, but spread out in the universe rather than broadcasted from a broadcasting station or loudspeaker. And you might have also experienced a perfume and also kind of taste of like an ambrosia and an inner kinesthetic feeling. But whatever you did experience, that's not for me to suggest. It will come when the time is right. But what I would suggest, that what I'm trying to get us to do now is to try to sense the new birth taking place within us. It's very difficult to do this because if we try to capture it with our consciousness, with an act of consciousness, we immediately distort it by labeling it. We're trying to verbalize it, we label it. And of course we might even kill it by our, because exactly as I said, like a photon will divert an electron. So it's much more a question of emotion than understanding, because all creativity starts in emotion and then it manifests in understanding. So it's the ecstasy of the fresh emergence of life, which is not yet formed, like the blasto form of the fetus. It's not yet, the cells are not differentiated, it's not yet somatic reality, let's say. It's just simply yet in a formative process. You can't see it exactly, you can't outline it, it's can't really grasp it. Or you have in fact it's self-discovery, as we already said, so you're not experiencing it. It is your real self, that is your dynamic self, not your static self, it's always been, but the ongoing dynamic mutation of your being, of your real being, as it emerges in the center, let's say, of your being, rather like the fresh petals inside a rose, for example, as compared with the faded ones at the jagged ends. The faded ones are gradually being eliminated, and this new birth takes place in the center, and it's contrasts with the jaded petals at the surface, at the periphery, by its freshness and vitality and purity, innocence, naivety, if you like. In fact, it is an experience of original innocence, which Christ speaks about. And all creativity starts in an act of trusting innocence like that of a child. There's no guile and no sophistication and no aging, no decrepitude. Now, the trouble with this is, of course, this concern about the self. I mean, the personal consciousness or the act of personal will, those are the things that we have to learn how to not do away with, but somehow to put out of action so they don't disturb what's coming through. It's very difficult to learn how to let a cosmic consciousness take over from the personal consciousness, and an impersonal consciousness take over from the personal consciousness, and an impersonal will take over from the personal will. And that's where we apply what we learned a moment ago. A kind of cosmic awakening that is taking place, and which is able to sense the new birth. Now we have to do rather like the Egyptians showed in one of their papyri, where the soul is represented, the personal soul, the Ba, is represented as a bird and it just sits on that door there, and it's not participating in what's happening. It's just a witness, but a distant witness. is more experience a kind of cosmic will that is coming through, moving, pressing towards evolution, towards moving ahead. And the way you can experience that, you have to be very detached in your personal will or your personal consciousness to let this happen. It's like all the deeper layers of your being, the cosmic layers of your being that are beginning to emerge. A very good example would be like, for example, a tree that one has cut down to the roots. And all of a sudden a new tree grows out of that stump. So you're getting down to that deep layer that is the stump, you see. And out of that, a new growth emerges. And it's all the forces in that stump that are finding a new way of being, different from the tree that was down before. And so you can't be the observer, you see, that's the whole problem. You can't be the observer, and yet we want to know what's happening. There's a contradiction there. So the only way is to let go of your personal identity and realize that behind that there's the cosmic dimension that is impersonal. There are layers of our being that are impersonal, or transpersonal, if you like. And that are endowed with their own motivation, and actually one might say that they are powered by a kind of cosmic nostalgia, a pursuit of excellence. So the splendor beyond the universe that may transpire in the form of excellence. Like the excellence of a work of art. And that's trying to come through, and it gets distorted very quickly by our will, and by our ego, and as I say, all our mental constructs, and all our education, and so on, civilization. And that's why I say, get down to your roots. That is the state of the personal retreat, withdrawing from the world, being without desire, while the whole of life is a fulfillment of desire. It's not condemning it, it's just that in order to go on retreat one has to be without desire, and therefore not expect anything of the retreat, not try to rebirth oneself, but let the divine operation take place and facilitate it simply in its early stages. And after that, then one can, as say, go out on a limb and really do bring one's own imprint upon what's happening. It requires one to be very peaceful and very much in tune with the harmony of the universe, and see oneself as an expression of that harmony. And assist the miracle of the re-emergence of the continual, recurrent re-emergence of life within. see, now one can't earmark what quality is coming through. There's no way. One can only feel a kind of attunement. One doesn't know how to label it. But sure enough, one can feel that dynamic urge towards blossoming forth in a new way, and liberating and exploding, let's say, the limits that one imposes upon this birth by one's sclerosed personality. I'd like us at this moment, which is midday, to observe 1 minute of silence. It's an experiment that we're doing in order to work for peace by the power of thought. If we all do it together at that particular moment, we'll be forming a belt of positive thinking. And there's a scientist who is proving now that massive thought forms have an effect upon sunspots, and variation in sunspots is correlated with stages of war and stages of peace on the planet. you like to just breathe heavily now and start moving your fingers and arms and stretching yourselves. So the program is now we have a break for lunch, and after that I think you're going to be introduced to some Sufi dancing. It's a change. One of the things I want to make you aware of is that by moving the body, one is churning one's magnetic field. And if you remember at school, you might have learned the law of Gauss, which is that supposing you have a dynamo that is like your right hand is moving whirling in the direction of the fingers of your right hand, then you are inducing a current of electricity upwards in what would be like your thumb in the center of the dynamo. So if you're whirling to the left, anti-clockwise, you'll be inducing a current that rises. And that's the reason why the people doing the dervish dance have an experience of almost like levitation, of being extremely light and overcome the heaviness of the gravity pull, let's say, of matter. And that's the impression one has, and you can do it yourself and experience what it's like. The other thing is a practice we shall be doing this afternoon, which is again, called the zikr of the Sufis, which is again moving the head in a vertical plane, and in so doing one is again churning the magnetic field. This time in this direction, which is clockwise, and consequently one is inducing a current that turns within, and the consequence is that practice had the effect of making one feel like drawing within, like what we were doing this morning. And the other thing I want to say is that I brought with me I don't know what happened to it. My beggar's bowl? I must have left it upstairs.
We'll bring it out.
Yes. Well, anyway, it's an Indian beggar's bowl. And indeed, I am begging for a lot of people that we are helping in India. At this moment, I mean, it's utter chaos, and people are scuttling the little bit of richness they have as real suicide, but it's frenzy, madness. But well, we are giving food to a lot of people who are starving. We're giving milk to 300 children a day. We're giving them school education, clothing, and we have a clinic. We're giving medical attention to people who are so poor that they wouldn't even have the money to go to have a bus fare, to pay for a ticket on a bus to go to the hospital. Some of these people are living in, they get a little piece of cloth and they tie them to, or cardboard, and they tie them with strings on the tombs, and that's where they're living. And when it rains, when there's a monsoon, then of course everybody's flooded and a lot of people die. Children die, older people die. These are people who, first of all, there's no welfare in India. And these are people who could not find a job even if they tried. They are the victims of a ruthless society. And unless somebody does something about it, well, they will just be dying. And that's what's happening. Dying, well, there are several ways of dying, but this is dying in despair. This is dying in distress. I don't know whether you can imagine what it's like to die of starvation and of despair. There's nothing to look forward to in life. And so when we know that we can, if we're hungry, we can eat, and we can have, if we have pain in our tooth, we can go to the dentist and so on. And here are people who are just left there to die in misery. There are wonderful people working there, like Mother Teresa, for example. But whatever we do is like a pinprick when you consider the amount of problems. Yes, this is my biggest problem. Thank you. So So that's what I have this Beggars Bowl for. And so if you can help out a little bit, whatever you do can contribute towards making things a little bit easier there. We have a team of people working there, and they're in Delhi now, right in the middle of all of that. And they're really beautiful people, dedicated people who are just going there just to help out. And if you would like to join in and help, even actually normally one can't get a visa for more than 3 months anyway. Then of course you would be welcome to help out. And if you want to write out a check, you can do it. It's, for the moment, it's still called Children's Ashram. You know, the word ashram is an Indian word which means like a spiritual center or something like that. But that's because before we had a kind of orphanage. We used to take children off the road and give them food and clothing and education and so on, housing. But we felt that it was unfair to take them from their families. Now it's really supporting the families as a unit. And can you imagine that, I forget now, but I think it's like $30 will keep a family going for a month. Can you imagine? Well, at least give them basic food. So if you feel like helping, that's what it's about. And if you want to write the check out, well, it could be in the name of Children's Ashram, or it could be in the new name, I think, is called the Hope Project, or whatever. And I'm saying this because while I'm still viable, I can still collect money, as I'm doing now for it, but the doctors are telling me to slow down. And so when I'm not able to do this anymore, then I'm rather worried about how this project is going to continue. So if you can give a kind of ongoing commitment, of course, it would be very helpful. Okay.
You could remain seated for a minute. I'll give the announcements of the rest of the day. We'll have the dance at Crockett Academy down the street at 1:40, so it should give you a little over an hour to eat. And Pir will be resting during the dance. And Pir Vilayat will start speaking again at 3. And you'll have 15 minutes to get back here. Crockett Academy is, you take the first road up here, a few hundred yards down the road.